All right, so here we go. Okay, so as we have covered so far, this story is incredibly dark. It started with Tantalus and his envy of the gods purely because he was not one. I can shut that for you. And then what did he do, of course? A pretty hefty conversation about what he did.
Murder.
Who did he murder?
His mom.
Not his mom.
Sister.
His what?
Sister.
Not his sister. His own
Son.
children. Yeah. Yeah, son. You're right. Yep, you're right. No. Pelops was the son. You got it.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting thing. This story starts with this sacrifice of a son in order for this man to have something that he didn't have before. And we talked a lot about that, just where it shows up, how it shows up in many other stories. Also, from the very beginning of this class, I kind of told you that the killing of children is a wildly rampant theme in most grand stories, especially when there's power to be had. And then it sort of trickles down, this cursed blood of Tantalus, who was then, of course, found out by the gods, and justice was enacted upon him. His son was resurrected from the dead, Pelops, and was given the isle, or the portion of the mainland of Greece called the Peloponnese now. Even after that all happened, the cursed blood of Tantalus continued to trickle down, and it landed on his remaining offspring, Atreus and Thyestes. Thyestes slept with Atreus' wife, another taboo crime. We just have taboo to taboo to taboo. And instead of killing his brother, he killed his brother's children. And of course, Thyestes is not a god, so he could not divine what had happened, and he did consume his children. Which, as you guys know, parallels something pretty early on. What was one of the earliest stories I told you of a man consuming his children?
Chrono.
Yeah, Kronos eating his own children. He did that intentionally. So the taboo crimes here are intermixed, and it's hard to say which one is worse. A brother feeding another brother's children to him unknowingly, or a father eating his own children on purpose. Because then we have, like I've been saying to you guys many, many times, we have this interesting echo chamber of what happens in the divine having consequence in the natural, and then of also what happens in the natural reaping a calling towards the divine. And that's where this story of Orestes really comes into play. Because his own father was murdered by his own mother, and so he was then forced by God to do what? His own father was killed by his own mother, and so then he was called by God to do what? Orestes. Kill his own mom. And her lover. And he didn't want to, but he was called by God to. So this justice, this enacting of justice, is this interesting sort of righteous theme of this cursed house. But remember, guys, I told y'all before, it did not end with the death of Clytemnestra, his mom. It actually got much more confusing. And so this third and final portion of the Orestia, the play that this whole thing takes place in, is called the Trial of Orestes. Because he could tell, even right after he killed his own mom, this isn't right. I was told by God to do this. I tried to run away from this calling to do this, but this is not right. And so he fled. He knew that he was now carrying the taboo crimes of it all. By being the person who touched the taboo darkness last, killing matricide, killing his own mother, he was the one who bore it all. And we've covered enough stories where that sort of theme is really, really important to not lose track of. He carried all of this darkness with him as he fled. And it reeked supernaturally into the air. And who sniffs out this kind of taboo darkness in eternity? The Furies, not the furries. That's weird. All right? The Furies. All right? And they could smell this taboo blood on him. And this is what you guys might be asking, like, why did the Furies not come into play earlier? It's because they really only come out of the shadows to rip something to absolute shreds if there's no one else to exact justice and vengeance on the perpetrator. And that's what's so interesting about Orestes. That's who he was. He was the one who was still living in that bloodline to enact vengeance and justice on the most recent perpetrator of taboo sin, his mother. But by enacting that vengeance and justice, he now bears it. Do you guys feel that eternal cycle? There's no ending of that darkness. Even Clytemnestra thought, oh, I killed Agamemnon. I have sanctified my house and brought revenge for my daughter. But she killed her own husband. That's taboo. Orestes did the same thing. So many family members, so much darkness, so much twisted unfaithfulness I'm now bringing an end to, but I have to do it by enacting such an evil. I have to bear that same concept of evil in my body, my heart, my spirit, my mind, in order for it to be moved on. But that's what makes this is one of the most resolute movements of mythology available to man. Where does this end? Where does this darkness, this horror, justice, where does it end? Because the Furies are calling out for him to die. If he doesn't die, this continues forever. And so, you guys know, this has not just existed in the house of Atreus. How were the Furies born? How were the Furies born? Do you guys remember? They were born at the dawn of time. Kronos killed Saturn. Ouranos. Kronos killed Ouranos. Do you guys remember how he killed him? I don't want to dwell on this too long. He cut him into pieces with his scythe, turned him into stars. But then what happened to him? He got killed by his own son. There's no humans involved in this. Yet what is the crime? Taboo. Eternal. Family-killing taboo. And then when Kronos was killed, he was castrated. And that vessel of family creating, listen, I have to bring this up, otherwise the fruition of what happens at the end of the story will not be as perfect as it is. His vessel of family making was chopped off eternally. And the blood from that wound seeped down into the earth, and that's how the Furies were born. And from that point on, that's who they were. They were hound dogs for any kind of taboo, whether it be eternal or temporal. Because really, there is no difference. Any kind of crime like this has no dimension that it's locked into. It's horror, and it's wrong. And so that's what makes this story so complex. Is that now it's not just, was Orestes right? It's, what has always been right? We were born. They're looking at themselves. These gods of Olympus, the house of Olympus, is looking at themselves and saying, we are stained with the exact same kind of evil as the house of Atreus. This eternal home that we've been talking about for months together. This eternal home has existed in the same cycle of taboo as this temporal one. So what is mercy here? Is there mercy here? Because from the blood of our grandfather are these animals, these eternal and supernatural animals that will never die, hunting out the vengeance of this kind of crime. And now it's all culminating in the man of Orestes. And so we, of course, now have the people of Greece, which, just to give you guys a little bit more of a setting, I've been kind of up here in the... So let me give you more actual physical setting. Apollo went and found Orestes after he fled. And he said, we've got to get this settled. You can't just flee from your sin forever. We've got to get this settled. And Orestes said, okay. And so he grabbed him, took him to Athens, into the temple of Athena, which, if you guys don't know, you can't be touched if you're in the temple of Athena, which is what makes the Medusa story so dark. But you can't be touched in the temple of Athena. So he brings him there. And what is Athena? She's the goddess of what, dude? Strategy and warfare, but most famously, wisdom. So this is the place where the wise decision is going to be made. Not only by the wise gods, the gods of light and reason, but also by the wisest people in Greece, the Athenians. So human judgment and divine judgment is going to be placed here in Athens. It's a perfect little picture here. Can't call it a little picture. Huge picture here. But the Furies are sitting in the accusing seats. So who's going to protect Orestes? And Apollo, the one who gave him this task to kill his mother, says, I will be your defender. And so it's a really, really interesting thing to see so many people and so many gods debate the righteousness of what's happened here. Because we've been left with a lot of stories, both human and divine, where it's like, was it right for that to happen? I think the one that we focused on the most was the Actaeon story. The Artemis and Actaeon story. It's like, was that right? Some of those times, the answer is never given. Just, whoop, I wonder. And that's what makes those stories so good sometimes. But this is the one where I say it's actually resolute to finish. And that's what makes this story so beautiful. Is that Apollo defends Orestes. He gives great logical arguments, emotional arguments, spiritual arguments for his defendant. But then the Furies, these eternally, violently wise beings, say, doesn't matter. This is what has happened. This calls for death. And so, eventually, there's a moment where it looks like Orestes is about to be handed over to the Furies. But then someone steps in, and it's Athena. And she breaks a tie that's between everybody. And she says, the only thing that can cure all of this, eternal and natural, is mercy. Mercy has to be given. And she steps in to vote yes on Orestes' life. And the Furies then go into a horrifying fit. Like, I can't imagine what that would have looked like. Just morphing and writhing and screaming and screeching and scratching, bleeding, gnashing for the death of Orestes that's not going to come. But then Athena goes up to them and she puts her hands on them. And she says, this mercy isn't just for Orestes. I give this mercy to you. And she says, you have been the harbingers of doom for those who threaten family blood, family marriage, childbirth. You have been this violent defender. What if, instead of changing you completely, you become a protector of it in light? And so the Furies go from being these horrific, terrifying things that come after the fact of violent darkness, they then become what's called, their name changes, which I think is super significant, the changing of a name. They become the Eumenides. And now they're not an after-the-fact darkness and the shadows, violence and fear of brokenness. They then become the Eumenides, which go forth and protect childbirth. They protect marriage vows. They protect the bloodlines of families. And they're invited into a new existence with the gods and with man. So in this trial, you then have 3 generations of natural taboo, from Tantalus to Atreus to Agamemnon's house, as well as Ouranos to Kronos to Zeus himself. This tri-generational coalescence right on one man, healing both the natural and the divine. And mercy and forgiveness being the answer. And it's amazing. This tragedy of the house of Atreus becomes one of the most beautiful fruitions of justice that we've seen so far this year. And I don't know if you guys have seen this movie. I'm going to go ahead and start it. We're obviously not going to get very far today. But this is what we're going to watch. All right, you guys, of course, now will just have the rest of the week to do your little things, your projects. But it's this movie right here. And if you've seen it, please don't spoil anything. Does anybody know what this movie is? Just Mercy. All right? And it's a true story. So this is the first movie that we're going to watch, this first story that we're going to watch this year, where everything in it happened. All right? Once again, y'all, I'm obviously not giving y'all like easy hitters. Bless you. I'm not giving y'all easy hitters for movies to watch. If you get disturbed and you are like a very emotionally fragile person, which is fine, I am, you don't have to watch this movie. All right? It is about inmates on death row. Okay? But it's one of the greatest movies I've ever seen in my entire life. All right? So I'm going to go ahead and start it.